Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Meditation got its start as a religious practice. Now, science is discovering the health benefits of yoga and meditation. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Meditation may seem like a good way to relieve stress, but can it have other physiological effects? Does meditation affect the size and shape of the brain, as well as its function?
Many people can't imagine sitting still long enough to learn how to meditate. We're bombarded with messages from our computers, phones, and even our watches. How can we learn to slow down and breathe? Is there technology that can help?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, the science of practicing yoga and meditation.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, people who are recruited to participate in studies of antidepressant medications may not represent typical depressed patients. According to a new study, subjects in clinical trials of antidepressants do not appear to reflect real-world conditions. The investigators examined more than 4,000 participants in the landmark STAR-D study, the largest and longest study of depression treatment that has ever been conducted. They found that more than 80% of these individuals wouldn't qualify for most antidepressant trials. Some would have been left out because they were over 65. Others would be excluded because they have another medical condition in addition to depression. The result is that studies of antidepressants don't really tell doctors or patients how well the drugs will work in real life. In fact, most antidepressants have a disappointing performance compared to how well they do in highly controlled clinical trials.
Psychiatrists often prescribe anti-anxiety drugs such as alprazolam or lorazepam for people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. This can be brought on by terrible accidents, physical injuries, disasters, sexual assault, or the horrors of war. Although such benzodiazepine medications can ease anxiety symptoms and insomnia in other situations, a recent review of 12 studies showed no benefit from treating PTSD with these drugs. There was actually a hint that recent trauma victims treated with a benzodiazepine might be at higher risk of developing PTSD than those who received no medication. It's not clear that these drugs actually worsen symptoms of PTSD and make recovery more difficult, but it is possible that such medications interfere with coping mechanisms that are important for recovery from traumatic events.
Doctors often advise their patients to stay home when they're sick so they don't spread their germs to healthy people. If only health professionals took their own advice. A study conducted at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia found a surprisingly high proportion of healthcare providers report for work even when they're ill. Although these doctors, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants recognized that this could put patients at risk, they worried about letting down their colleagues. More than half said they had come to work, even though they were coming down with a respiratory tract infection. The researchers noted that the culture of healthcare systems encourages many providers to work even when they're sick. Changing this culture will be difficult, but it's essential for public health.
The overwhelming majority of generic drugs are now made abroad. India supplies a large proportion of those generic formulations. In recent days, 2 large Indian drug companies have received bad news from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Reddy's Laboratories has had to recall certain lots of the blood pressure medication amlodipine, as well as the anti-seizure drug divalproex. The cholesterol-lowering drug atorvastatin is also under a recall. The FDA has banned imports of medications from another Indian drug company, Emcure Pharmaceuticals. The plant in Hinjawadi failed to meet quality standards for good manufacturing practices. More alarming is the possibility that clinical research organizations that conduct generic drug studies may not be meeting quality standards. The World Health Organization discovered serious problems at one of the largest organizations, GVK Biosciences. As a result of the investigation, European regulators disallowed hundreds of generic drugs. Now, a different company, Quest Life Sciences, has been warned about defective trials. How this might affect generic drugs in the United States is unknown because the FDA has not made its investigations public.
Morticians appear to be at much higher risk of developing a rare but devastating neurological condition called ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The investigators suspect that the high levels of formaldehyde used in the embalming process could be responsible. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Meditation has been practiced for thousands of years. It's usually considered a spiritual practice. But now researchers are studying the physiological effects of meditation.
Today, we'll consider how meditation, or practicing yoga, might actually be beneficial for our health.
We're talking with Dr. Murali Doraiswamy. He's professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University, where he's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. At Duke, he directs a clinical trials unit developing products used to treat psychiatric and neurological disorders. Dr. Doraiswamy has also served as an advisor to leading government agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Doraiswamy.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Dr. Doraiswamy, it's wonderful to have you back on the People's Pharmacy. Today we're talking about meditation and yoga, and I think a lot of our listeners think, it's something weird about that, and, people do it, but it doesn't have any particular benefit. You've been studying both meditation and yoga for a very long time, and you actually have data to suggest that it may affect the brain. Can you tell us how?
It's a great question. Meditation today is exactly where exercise was. Physical exercise like running was about 20 years ago. People thought it's fun, but it may not benefit your health until big randomized trials were done. And today we have more than 5,000 research studies that have been published in a source called PubMed on the effects of yoga and meditation.
5,000?
That's right. But not all of these are high-quality studies. And not all of these are controlled trials in human beings. A lot of these are small pilot studies. A lot of these are studies done in countries outside of the U.S., so it's hard to judge the quality. I don't mean to say that in a negative way. So we decided about 2 years ago, myself and a colleague of mine, to try to extract the highest quality studies that met criteria for what we consider grade A studies. These are randomized control trials where oftentimes the rater is blinded to the treatment assignment, and then the meditation and yoga practices were done in a very standardized, high-quality manner. We found only about 16 or so of these studies with regards to brain and mental health as outcomes. There are a number of other studies in cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. And by and large, we found that the results from the 16 studies were quite encouraging. None of these studies were what we would call large mega studies like the 10,000 patient Framingham study or the Women's Health Initiative. There's been no studies like that. A lot of them were small studies, but all of the results were quite promising, suggesting that yoga and meditation can profoundly influence brain health and mental well-being.
Well, let me ask you, when we say meditation, I think a lot of people think, that's very hard. You have to be a super spiritual kind of person, and I couldn't do that. So tell us, what is meditation and how hard is it?
Meditation's quite easy. It's hard to become an expert meditator where you tune out everything and you're completely sort of in this still space, if you will. But the beginning practice of meditation, simply you can just lie in bed, find a quiet space in your house, in your yard early in the morning. Just sit, close your eyes, and be introspective. Instead of thinking of outside things, you just think inwards, focus your attention inwards, try to slow your breathing, and try to calm your thoughts. The first probably 2 to 3 months of your practice, you're not going to be able to still your mind completely, but it'll come with practice, and it's not that hard at all. And even 15 to 20 minutes of meditation every day can help. And the easiest way to focus on your inner thoughts and focus sort of and remove the outside distractions is to choose something called as a mantra, a phrase that you can repeat constantly. It's kind of like counting sheep when you're trying to fall asleep so that you're tuning out all the sort of irrelevant stuff from the day.
When you say help, what do you mean? Let's start at a macro level, because we think of stress and we think of how busy we are and how many tasks we have during the course of the day, and I should have, and I could have, and I would have. So how do we deal at the big macro stress level, and then how do we approach this whole process of meditation and yoga and how it actually affects the brain? Because after all, you are a neuroscientist interested in what's actually going on inside the brain at a molecular level. So let's start at the macro and work our way down to the cellular.
Right. At a very macro level, what meditation does is it induces something called the relaxation response. And we don't exactly know the mechanism underlying that, but we think it's by stimulating a nerve in our body called the vagal nerve, and it's called the vagus. The word comes from vagabond because it runs through our whole body. It runs from the brain into our heart, into our gut. In fact, it controls the rate at which your heart beats. It controls the rate at which we digest food, and it also is involved in processing memories in the brain, and it's also involved in sleep. So this is a very important nerve. And stimulating the vagus nerve produces a relaxation response, which is the opposite of the stress response. So meditation, slowing our breaths, and certain yoga practices by stimulating the relaxation response can also affect other tissues in our body and can also affect many other chemicals in the brain. And that, we think, is the mechanism underlying their effects on disease risk and also our overall sort of stress and well-being.
I'm wondering what you as a neuroscientist see as the effects then of both yoga and meditation on what's going on in the brain.
We don't fully understand how yoga and meditation change the brain because it's been hard to study that at a microscopic level in a living person's brain. There have been 3 types of studies done with regards to neuroscience and neuropsychiatry. One is to see how meditation can benefit people with serious mental illnesses. The second are studies seeing how yoga and meditation can change the size, shape of our brain through the use of modern MRI imaging techniques. And the third is to try to see how our personality changes even for a normal person. In other words, can we socially transform an individual so that we can enhance their empathy, their compassion, their general sense of, I guess, belonging to the universe, if you will. So that's a much more profound outcome.
Well, let's start with that third one.
Yes.
Can we change the way that people relate to the world through meditation?
I think so. There's a whole new field emerging called social neuroscience. And the field of social neuroscience suggests that there are certain circuits in the brain that are related to empathy, to compassion, to judgment, to morality. Now, the data with regards to yoga and its ability to socially transform an individual is still largely anecdotal. There are some studies suggesting that yoga affects a particular region of the brain called the temporoparietal junction. Now, the temporoparietal junction is involved in morality, and it's also involved in out-of-body experiences. It's a kind of very interesting area in the brain. Studies have shown that if somebody has a lesion in the temporoparietal junction, for example, they're much more likely to be willing in theoretical experiments to push a relative off a bridge. So it's kind of an interesting region, and yoga seems to be one of the regions that yoga modulates. And of course, we would need a large-scale experiment to see how yoga truly transforms a person. But the Dalai Lama remarked that if we taught all our children meditation and yoga, in one generation, we might be able to stop all wars.
Dr. Duraswamy, we spoke with one of the world's experts on post-traumatic stress disorder, Dr. van der Kolk. He's in Boston, and he suggested that yoga could have a profound impact on people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which struck us as kind of odd. Like, wow, really? It's one of the best tools you have in the toolkit when it comes to trying to help people get out of that PTSD cycle of stress and fear, anxiety, and everything else that goes with it. Do you have a mechanism whereby that might work?
I think so. I mentioned that there were 16 high-quality randomized trials showing yoga benefits psychiatric and mental disorders. And one of the types of mental disorders that yoga seems to have a very profound effect on are anxiety disorders. And PTSD is a subtype of an anxiety disorder. In PTSD, there is a small part of the brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala is kind of like our emotional thermostat. The amygdala seems to be revved up in people with PTSD. And we don't know why. It might be the experiences they've had in the battlefield. The brain is sort of reliving those experiences. It's not able to shut down the thermostat and lower it. Meditation, by inducing the relaxation response, seems to be able to modulate the amygdala response very, very profoundly, almost to the same extent as the best available anti-anxiety drugs, without any of the drowsiness or memory-impairing side effects of drugs like Valium.
Memory-impairing side effects. So we've heard some research lately that some of these so-called benzodiazepines may increase the risk for dementia or Alzheimer's disease. That's your field. What do you think?
I think it's not fully proven yet, but there's clear evidence that people who take low doses of pills such as Valium for years definitely have impaired memory. It can be sometimes very subtle. Sometimes it can be very profound to the extent that they come in and we think they have dementia, and you take them off these medications. You have to take them off people slowly if they've been on it for a long period of time, so you should not stop it on your own. And once you take these people off, we have something called as a reversible dementia in many cases where the fog almost lifts.
So yoga and meditation may be an alternate to these benzodiazepines without the complications.
Correct. An alternative way, because yoga and meditation may not kick in right away, and it takes a while for people to get comfortable practicing it. A better strategy might be to start someone on a low dose of a anti-anxiety medication, also recommend yoga and meditation as an adjunct, and as they sort of ramp up the yoga and meditation, they can sort of wean themselves off of the medication.
You're listening to Dr. Murali Duraswamy, Professor of Psychiatry and Medicine at Duke University. He's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences and directs a clinical trials unit that helps develop products for psychiatric and neurological disorders. He also advises governmental agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
After the break, learn about some of the differences between yoga and meditation.
Get more details on how these practices affect the brain and what we mean by neuroplasticity.
It's never too late to start meditating.
How might yoga help ADHD? Can kids with ADHD learn to meditate?
We'll learn about the connection between breathing and meditation and find out about technology that can help.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 999. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about meditation and yoga and how we can use them to improve our health. If you've seen a video of people doing incredible yoga poses, you might be intimidated by the idea. Should you be? Perhaps you think your mind is too active to meditate. Are you afraid you have too many thoughts swimming around in your head? There may be ways even people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can benefit from learning to meditate.
Our guest is Dr. Murali Doraiswamy. He's professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University, where he's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. At Duke, he directs a clinical trials unit developing products used to treat psychiatric and neurological disorders. Dr. Doraiswamy has also served as an advisor to leading government agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
Dr. Doraiswamy, we've been talking about meditation and yoga as if they were one and the same thing. You were kind enough to explain meditation and how someone could start meditating. What about yoga? How does it relate? And aren't there physical exercises that are involved with yoga?
Yeah, there are many, many schools of yoga. In fact, there's so many schools of yoga now that I can't even keep track of it. People have patented neuro yoga and cardio yoga and paddle yoga and South Beach yoga. And so I think the original intent of the word yoga means unite. The intent is to unite the mind and the body. And we all know that the mind has a profound impact on the body and on all physical diseases and conditions. So that was the original intent of yoga. Yoga does have a physical component that we call asanas, and they're mostly stretching exercises, at least the way it was practiced originally in India. Now in America, we also have an aerobic form of yoga, which is often called power yoga, where, a lot of vigorous, active movements. So certainly, the physical component of yoga, the asanas, are very important for stretching. They're very helpful for people with arthritis and other kinds of sort of age-related bone conditions. And the aerobic component certainly benefits the heart. But I think because of the physical component, just like with any other form of rigorous exercise, you really need to start cautiously. You need to make sure that you're under the guidance of a good instructor. And if you have medical conditions, you should check with your physician.
You said a little earlier that yoga and perhaps meditation as well can affect both the size and shape of the brain, which I think comes as a real surprise to a lot of people. In essence, you're talking about something neuroscientists refer to as neuroplasticity. Tell us what that means and what data exists to support that idea.
So for a long time, people thought the adult human brain was not capable of change, that it was fixed, that by the time you got out of your teenage years, your brain had grown. It was, you were doomed to sort of have, what you were left with after 20. But we now know the adult brain is capable of something called experience-dependent change. How you use it can either increase or decrease the different parts of the brain. So if you're practicing active music, the part of the brain that's involved in music can become larger in size, can become more flexible, can become more versatile. There are also some changes in the brain that happen which are very surprising. That is, if one part of the brain is damaged, another part of the brain can sometimes take over the job of that particular area. And so that's another aspect of neuroplasticity. In other words, the specialties in the brain are interchangeable, if you will. So what researchers at Harvard found out almost, I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, is they found that expert meditators had much larger gray matter regions in the brain than people who had never meditated or who were novice meditators. And to the extent that they found that a 50-year-old meditator's brain looked like a 20-year-old non-meditator's brain, suggesting that regular meditation can also slow the age-related shrinkage of the gray matter regions in the brain. Now, this was a cross-sectional study, but they subsequently did a controlled clinical trial to actually verify that a 6-week course of meditation does produce robust increase in certain areas of the brain, especially the regions related to memory and emotional regulation.
Now, this 50-year-old person whose brain looks like that of a 20-year-old, has he been meditating since he was 20?
I think in that particular study, they just looked at expert meditators who had been meditating for several years, not necessarily for 30 years. So it's not like, for every year of meditation, you get a year of benefit in terms of shrinkage. It might even be more. For 2 years of meditation, you might get 5 or 6 years of benefit. I think people haven't quantified it yet.
So a lot of our listeners are going, yeah, I've not been meditating for the last 50 years. Will it do me any good? If I were to start meditating tomorrow, would it be beneficial to my brain, to my health, and would yoga help?
Correct. It's never too late to start. In fact, probably the best age at which to start meditating is in your midlife, because that's when a lot of the bad stuff starts accumulating in the brain. We know your risk for Alzheimer's, your risk for strokes, your risk for a lot of other brain diseases might begin in your 40s or 50s. So that's a good time to start meditating as a preventive measure. But if you're still in your 50s or 60s, it's never too late. And again, as I pointed out, if you're in your 60s or 70s, just use the more gentler forms of yoga. Don't jump in and try to do some vigorous exercise and then all of a sudden you find, you've sort of got a sprain and you're injured for 6 weeks.
Now, you've been telling us that meditation and presumably also yoga can change the structure of the brain, and you've talked about how the function can also change because of neuroplasticity. So perhaps you can tell us whether or not there's any data on if meditation or yoga could help someone with attention difficulties like ADHD.
So the studies of meditation do suggest that meditation can enhance the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center. It also increases the size of the frontal lobes, which is critically involved in attention. So these two lines of data suggest that, yes, it does make us more focused, it does enhance concentration, does enhance attention. There is a very large trial of about 800 school kids that showed that regular practice of yoga meditation can not only improve attention and concentration, can also improve academic performance. Now, the trials in people with ADHD suggest that, yes, it does have some benefits, but the benefits are probably not as big as those offered by prescription medications such as Ritalin and Adderall.
I can just imagine parents going, how in the world would I ever get my child to sit still for 3 minutes, let alone 10 minutes? So how do you help a child who might have attention deficit disorder actually try starting meditation and experimenting to see if there are any benefits?
It's very challenging, and I think what schools have attempted to do is to make it fun and playful, and they have introduced some sort of beginner-type yoga poses that kids find enjoyable. It's almost like a form of gymnastics. And introduce some fun mantras, maybe some mantras derived from Disney World cartoon lines or other things. And I think it's something that when they see their peers do, they pick up, and it's not easy by any means, even in adults. So it's especially in this era when our average attention span is just 8 seconds.
Precisely. Well, speaking of adults and meditation, you mentioned a little while ago that having a mantra or a phrase that you would repeat or deep breathing would be beneficial, but could you also help us understand some of the other ways people can learn how to meditate? Perhaps listening to some sort of gentle music. I mean, what would be practical for our listeners? Somebody who says, well, I've never done that. It sounds a little weird, but I'd like to give it a try. How would they start? So, to me, typically meditation is done in a quiet spot where there's no distractions. So you don't want traffic noise. You don't want sirens of ambulances in a big city. So find a quiet spot, preferably in nature, preferably early in the morning. People like music. That's great, but slow music. You don't want like techno music that's revving up your breathing. Slow,
Could be classical music, could be chill-out music at a very low volume. That's a great way to start meditating, especially to the sound of nature. If you have like an audio with like ocean waves or like a gentle sort of rainfall or something like that, that's a great way. I often meditate just lying in bed at night with my eyes closed, and I think about what happened during the day and let my thoughts wander.
You also mentioned breathing. Can you give us some sense of how you could use your breathing to slow your thinking process and begin to relax?
Correct. So the breathing is intimately related to the brain. People don't realize that. And there's also this sort of, I don't know if it's a myth or not, that the fewer breaths you take, the longer you live. And there's been some correlation that animals that breathe the least at the slowest rate live the longest. So the humans typically tend to breathe, 12 to 15 breaths a minute. And it's been suggested that if you can slow your breathing down to about a half that rate, even consciously, and get into the act of doing that for at least 10 minutes a day. I'm not suggesting that you breathe at 6, breaths a minute for the whole day. For at least 10 minutes, then that in turn enhances the vagal response, enhances the relaxation response, and can change your brain and prepare you for the whole day.
Is it really possible to slow your breath down by just paying attention to it? Different people have different sort of natural speeds of breathing. I know that Joe's breath rate is faster than mine because sometimes if I'm awake at night, I hear him and I can compare both of our relaxed breathing, and he takes about 5 breaths to my 3. So he's breathing more. Yeah. Stop, Joe.
Well, I don't want to stop breathing entirely, but the idea of actually paying attention to your breathing, most of us don't think about it.
Correct.
Unless we have asthma or some other condition. So it's something that we think of as autonomic, as automatic, as beyond our control. You're suggesting that we can take over, we can have conscious control of our breathing, and that has a benefit.
Yeah, it's like our heart rate. Most of us start out with a heart rate of 80 beats a minute, and once you start running and become fit, your heart rate drops to 50 beats a minute. And so your breathing is not any different. So there are some small gadgets you can buy. There's one called Aspire. I've not connected with the company. And you can attach it to your belt, and it'll tell you how many breaths you have, and it can actually teach you how to slow your breathing down. And breathing is, of course, related to your emotional state. So when you're emotionally sort of stressed, thinking about a lot of things, your breathing picks up, and when you're sort of calm, your breathing calms down.
Right. It's very difficult to breathe slowly if you're extremely anxious.
Well, and in fact, when you are anxious or upset or stressed, if you consciously pay attention to your breathing and slow it, it's likely that the stress and anxiety will also calm down.
Completely. It's a two-way feedback. You can use your breathing to change your brain.
You talked a little bit about your practice of kind of meditating at night before you actually go to sleep. How do other people practice meditation? Because when I think of those experienced meditators, I think of someone who says, okay, I'm going to take a certain amount of time out of my day. I'm going to make this a priority, and I'm going to sit comfortably and just meditate or breathe or do yoga. Americans tend to be so fast-paced, so involved in their work and their kids and their thises and their that's. The idea of actually taking time out of the day to breathe, to meditate, to relax seems almost impossible. It's not a priority. Even though exercise has now become a priority, people recognize that exercise is so essential to their health. How do we begin to move the needle from virtually no meditation, no yoga, no relaxation, to making it a priority like exercise?
Yeah, in fact, the people who think they have the least amount of time probably need it the most. So just to correct what you said, I actually meditate twice. I do my formal meditation in the morning when I first wake up, first thing in the morning, and then I do sort of a somewhat informal meditation just before I go to bed at night. But there are many ways to do it. You just have to set aside some time in the morning. The first thing in the morning, maybe wake up 15 minutes earlier than what you would normally and try to get that done. And you'll find that once you start meditating for that 15 minutes, it'll change how you look at time for the rest of your day. Nothing will be rushed anymore. The second place is at work. A number of companies have actually now started incorporating meditation. Google has a program called Search Inside Yourself. Target has a program called Meditating Merchants, where on campus they provide a silent room where people can go for 15, 20 minutes and meditate either in groups or by themselves. And so you can find that through your HR programs at your work.
People love gizmos, and these days, it's their watch or their Fitbit, or, there are now dozens of little gadgets that are supposed to help us with our exercise program. You mentioned this device that would fit on your belt and kind of monitor your breathing. Are there other devices that will help people relax, perhaps biofeedback, perhaps monitor their electroencephalogram, and let them actually learn how to begin to control that inner restlessness using some kind of technology?
Of course, ultimately, your brain waves are probably the best feedback you can get as far as meditation is concerned. And there's a device called the Muse. I'm again, don't have no relationship with the company. It's a small headset that you wear, and it tracks your brain waves, and it gives you feedback. And you can learn how to change your different brainwave patterns based on your meditative depth of meditation.
How would you know which brainwave pattern is better?
It actually shows that not in the form of data, but in the form of like waves, the speed of the waves on the screen. There's a stormy ocean and a stormy sort of night, and you can learn to calm the screen down just by changing your mental patterns.
So just as there are now devices that measure your electrocardiogram on your smartphone, there's a device that can help you calm your brainwaves.
Right. There are many. This is just one of them.
You're listening to Dr. Murali Doraiswamy. He's professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University. He's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences, where he also directs a clinical trials unit that helps develop products for psychiatric and neurological disorders. He also advises governmental agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
I love the idea of controlling brainwaves, sort of with a biofeedback technology. I got my start in the field of neuropharmacology, studying electroencephalograms and how drugs affect it. I like the idea of being able to do it yourself.
And I also like the idea that doing that might slow down the aging of your brain.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out about research on yoga and meditation.
What are telomeres? And how does yoga or meditation change them? There is a connection between stress and telomere length.
We'll also learn about Ayurvedic medicine and how it could be integrated with modern medicine, even though it dates back more than 5,000 years.
We'll take a look at how integrative medicine can incorporate attention to spiritual health, along with neurochemistry and DNA.
We'll also talk with integrative oncologist Mitch Gaynor about how he uses meditation with patients he's treating for cancer. What does science have to say about reducing stress through meditation?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website where you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 999. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We're talking about the power of meditation to change our biology and impact our health. A practice that's been treasured by many cultures all over the world for millennia is now being studied scientifically. The results are intriguing.
Our guest is Dr. Murali Doraiswamy. He's professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University, where he's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. At Duke, he directs a clinical trials unit developing products used to treat psychiatric and neurological disorders. Dr. Doraiswamy has also served as an advisor to leading government agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
Dr. Doraiswamy, you have described that there actually is a lot more research than people would imagine about what yoga is doing, what meditation is doing to our brains. And you've described the fact that a lot of the studies are not of really high quality. Is there anything coming along that you're excited about?
Yes, very much so. One of the most innovative studies that we'll be hearing about this year is called the Self-Directed Biological Transformation Initiative. The abbreviation is SBTI. It's a study that's being run out of the Chopra Center in Southern California. But what's interesting is it's a study being done in collaboration with 6 leading U.S. universities. It's co-designed by Dr. Rudy Tanzi at Harvard University, along with Dr. Deepak Chopra at the Chopra Center. Dr. Eric Topol, a noted cardiologist at the Scripps Clinic, is actually monitoring, providing all the cardiac monitoring. Dr. Elizabeth, who won the Nobel Prize for telomere discovery, is involved as a co-investigator. UCSD is involved, and Duke is involved as well. And what this study is looking at is how a short course of meditation, Ayurvedic lifestyle, and yoga-based exercises can physically transform an individual, not just psychologically and in terms of your medical health, but also at a cellular level. So they're measuring genes, they're measuring telomeres, they're measuring microbiomics, which is the bacteria in your gut. They're looking at cardiac changes using sensors. So it's a very comprehensive study, and perhaps the best such study that we have heard so far with regards to meditation.
Remind us what telomeres are and why they're important.
So telomeres are a marker on our chromosome that are related to longevity. And the length of the telomeres is an indication of your longevity. It's a biomarker. It's not a perfect indicator. And as we age, the telomerase enzyme sort of levels decrease and the telomere lengths decrease. And so one of the things is, can we physically change that through meditation?
And we've heard that people who are under stress, especially children in domestic violence situations, actually have different length telomeres than people who are more relaxed and more comfortable.
Well, and people who are caregivers for Alzheimer's patients, their telomeres shorten
Correct.
more rapidly. So it does seem to respond to stress. And then the question will be, can you slow that change down?
Correct. Dr. Lisa Eppel from UCSF is heading that component of the study, and we're hoping that it will reverse it.
Well, this sounds like the sort of study that Dr. Dean Ornish would be really excited about, because it's a little similar to a component that is not usually highlighted, but an important component of his study earlier was the meditation. I'm wondering what you mean by Ayurvedic lifestyle. You said meditation, you said yoga. What is an Ayurvedic lifestyle?
So Ayurveda is a Indian sort of holistic medicine, and it's really a plant-based medicine and a plant-based diet. And what Ayurveda does is it categorizes individuals into 3 body types and 3 emotional types. And based on that, it prescribes a certain set of exercises, a certain set of meditative practices, and a certain diet for that individual. So it's kind of personalized medicine done 5,000 years ago.
All right.
Well, you know, our listeners are going, oh, that sounds like the People's Pharmacy. That sounds like fruits and nuts.
Exactly.
And yet you are a high-powered neuroscientist at one of the major universities in this country, doing clinical research, loving double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. And people are sort of scratching their head and going, well, how does that fit together? I mean, a 5,000-year-old tradition together with modern-day medicine.
It fits perfectly because This 5,000-year-old tradition has never been fully tested and validated in a double-blind randomized controlled trial. And so this is a marriage between expert practitioners in that ancient field and expert practitioners in the field of clinical trials.
And is there a control group, or are there control groups for this trial?
Yes, the control group is actually going to be just staying at a 5-star hotel and getting all the benefits of a nice vacation.
Now, how can we sign up as subjects for this study?
It sounds wonderful. When will we begin to hear about the results?
I'm hoping some results will start coming out this summer and this fall. The study is completed and all the data are being analyzed.
Fantastic. Well, we hope you'll share with us when that becomes available. You're talking about integrative medicine in the greatest sense of the use of that word. And at the same time, you're talking about DNA, you're talking about molecular genetics, you're talking about not just our genome, but you're talking about a variety of neurochemicals. It seems like modern medicine has been very good at delving very deep into a very particular thing. Everybody's in their own little silo, especially in your field in neuroscience. So this idea of kind of pulling back to 35,000 feet and getting the bird's eye view as well as the molecular view is fascinating to me.
That's right. We want to begin to sort of correlate changes at a psychological level, at a human spiritual level, at a human quality of life level, and at the same time want to dig deep in and look at sort of the state-of-the-art medical markers such as telomeres, genomes. Imagine if we showed that meditation could change 20% of your genome expression. That would come as a shock to medicine.
Now, Dr. Doraiswamy, you just said we're looking at people at a spiritual level. And I think that may surprise a lot of our listeners. How do you look at people at a spiritual level? How do you measure spiritual experience? It seems kind of beyond the realm of science.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and there's no good answer. In this particular study, the self-directed biological transformation study, we're just doing self-ratings of how spiritual people consider themselves to be. But there have been other studies that have looked at this issue, and in fact, we have an article that Dr. Mehmet Oz and I co-authored an editorial in a magazine. And our article is called The Spiritual Heart. And what we're really discussing is there are probably at least two components to spirituality. One is the belief in the higher God, the creator, who is sort of responsive to prayer. And what studies have shown, at least so far, is that prayer may be helpful, but the one large randomized controlled trial of prayer that was done at Duke failed to show a benefit in terms of helping people with heart disease. So the other aspect of spirituality is it's almost universal to all religions, which is gratitude, being thankfulness, empathy, compassion, forgiveness. And that element of religion now has a new name. It's called positive psychology. As opposed to negative psychology, which is focusing on depression and anxiety and stress, positive psychology is what are the attributes that make a person flourish. And there's now some emerging studies showing that these attributes can also have profound effects on human health.
And this is what you're calling spirituality.
Yeah, to some extent. It's part of spirituality.
You mentioned earlier that if children were trained in yoga, the Dalai Lama suggested that maybe we could have a profound impact on social relationships. Could you go a little deeper into that? Because to me, that's fascinating. It seems like so much of what our children are exposed to are video games that are warlike and, so energetic that it's just the opposite of yoga. Help us understand how children might be different if they were exposed to yoga at a relatively early age.
So, between the ages of 5 and 15 or so, when the brain is going through dramatic developmental changes, that's when I think we have the biggest opportunity to incorporate habits in children that they can use for a lifetime. In fact, there are studies in animals that show that if children learn how to handle stress and see it as an opportunity for growth rather than as a threat at the age of 5, then they will never have problems with serious anxiety disorders or depression for the rest of their life. So that's one example of how a meditation practice and teaching people how to control their emotions can then come in helpful for them for the rest of their lives. And I think just the practice of thinking inwards somehow enhances empathy and compassion to others, might reduce bullying, might reduce a sense of aggression in children, and sort of direct them to more social capitalism, if you will. And that's my hope.
Dr. Doraiswamy, what should our listeners take away from this research that you have been describing?
I think the main takeaway is that there's emerging evidence suggesting that yoga and meditation can be very good for both physical and mental health, may have some preventive benefits for a number of conditions. The evidence is not conclusive yet, and big trials are currently underway. So I would encourage people to keep an open mind, and I would suggest that those that have stressful lives consider at least a 15 to 20-minute meditation practice every day, because they might find it far more effective and safe than the use of prescription drugs in the long run.
And where would people go to start learning more about both meditation and yoga?
Almost every gym, almost every medical school, almost every neighborhood Y has a yoga and meditation class. That would be a good place to start. There are also specialized yoga schools such as Iyengar yoga, hot yoga. So those are sort of the next level once people have gotten some introductory classes. I would suggest people also look at their employers. Most employer wellness programs have meditation and yoga classes, so that would be an easy place to start.
Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Murali Doraiswamy. He's professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University, where he's a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. At Duke, he directs a clinical trials unit developing products used to treat psychiatric and neurological disorders. Dr. Doraiswamy has also served as an advisor to leading government agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
We turn now to Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, founder and president of Gaynor Wellness. Dr. Gaynor is also clinical assistant professor of medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College. He is an integrative oncologist. His new book is The Gene Therapy Plan, Taking Control of Your Genetic Destiny with Diet and Lifestyle. We asked Dr. Gaynor how he uses sound and meditation with his cancer patients.
Well, every patient that comes in after I've done a thorough evaluation and reviewed the nutrition, I always give people a sound therapy session, which consists of some guided imagery, listening to nature sounds, listening to some yoga chanting. I have a great machine in my office called a biosonic machine. That was invented by a person who was the former chief engineer at Pioneer Stereo in Japan. And basically you listen with headphones, and there's a transducer that goes over the heart, and that transducer changes the music into pure vibration. So your body is 70% water. It's an excellent conductive medium for sound and vibration. So with that machine, literally you can hear with your ears, but you're also hearing with your body as well. And people invariably, even though it's probably the most stressful day of their life, will open their eyes at the end and say, Dr. Gaynor, I think that's the most relaxed I've ever felt in my life. And that's very empowering for patients, because people are able to see that even on the most stressful day of their life, they can experience this type of inner peace. And I found this enormously helpful in my practice.
Can you give us a sense of what the science suggests when it comes to reducing stress via meditation?
Yes, and as it relates to genes, it's absolutely fascinating, because none of this was known when I went to medical school. We were all taught that you have the genes that you receive from your parents, and that was that. And, it determined your eye color, your hair color, and things like that. But the fact of the matter is there is epigenetics also. So when you're subjected to extreme stress, there are changes that happen in numerous genes, and these genes express differently. And this actually is what we call heritable. It can be passed on from generation to generation. So we used to think it was just, mutations in the DNA. Maybe those could be passed on. But actually, stressful events that happen in your life can also be passed on to children and grandchildren. This whole field is known as behavioral epigenetics. And so, it really gets into people, in large numbers, people who went through the Cultural Revolution in China, through the Holocaust, through the bombing of London. All those things cause epigenetic changes that can be passed on generation to generation. So literally, this is a whole new field, and it elucidates the importance of stress reduction. I describe it, it's like an instrument. You can be the best guitar player in the world or the best pianist in the world, but if you're playing an out-of-tune instrument, it's not going to sound very good. And by the same token, you need to retune your body after stressful events, being around negative people, maybe at work, or undergoing certain stresses, like divorce or job loss. It's very important to incorporate these practices regularly, not only for your own health, but for your family's health as well. Once you start practicing, you really become the master of stress rather than the slave of stress.
Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
You've been listening to Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, founder and president of Gaynor Wellness. Dr. Gaynor is also clinical assistant professor of medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College. His new book is The Gene Therapy Plan, Taking Control of Your Genetic Destiny with Diet and Lifestyle. His website is GaynorWellness.com.
We spoke earlier with Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, professor of psychiatry and medicine at Duke University and a member of the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. He directs a clinical trials unit developing products for psychiatric and neurological disorders and advises governmental agencies, healthcare businesses, and patient advocacy groups.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineers the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 999. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. You can also share your own experience and thoughts on yoga, meditation, or today's show.
And when you go to our site, you can sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. Never miss another People's Pharmacy program again, and you can share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit BetterHelp.com/StopTheStigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.